Hey everyone, welcome to the mini lesson on 5.2 natural selection. Let's go ahead and get into it. So, the first thing you need to know about natural selection is variation. What is variation? Well, it can actually exist in many forms, whether it be in physical appearance, metabolism, fertility, mode of reproduction, behavior, and learning and mental ability. So, variation is basically any difference in these different categories across members of the same species. So in this example here, we have the Donax variabilis, which is small seawater clams that show variation with diverse color, as you can see, and patterning in their shells. So all of these are the same organism and of the same species, but they all look different or appear different in their color and pattern. This is a very easy example of variation. Maybe how could this variation lead to natural selection? Well, maybe these could be seen more easily by a predator organism rather than this, which is darker and less shiny. However, in order for natural selection to occur, there must be variation because if all the organisms are the exact same, then there isn't one better trait than the other. We'll get more into this with the rest of this mini lesson. So, the causes of variation. There are many ways in which variation can occur. The three most prevalent are mutation, meiosis, and sexual reproduction. I hope I'm saying meiosis correctly. Random mutations lead to changes in DNA sequences, which are then replicated within an organism. The new DNA sequences are also passed on to offspring with the same mutation. Soon, some individuals in a species are evolving with this mutation, while others are not, therefore representing variation. So if a DNA sequence within an organism experiences a mutation, a glycine is changed to an adenine or vice versa, there will then be a different amino acid, most likely. When there's a different amino acid or the amino acid sequence has been changed, like we learned about, there could be a different protein coded for. Obviously, proteins are very important in the way in which we carry out functions within our bodies, and the same is true for other organisms. So, changes in mutations can have a very large effect on an organism and how they interact with their environment. Yes, so here, meiosis is the process during sexual reproduction and involves crossing over the recombination of alleles present by each parent organism. It also involves random assortment of chromosomes during metaphase 1. There are therefore millions of combinations of chromosomes within humans 2 to the 23rd power, and the more chromosomes there are, the more variation that exists. So humans have 23 gamete chromosomes, 23 that come from each parent, so that's how we got that number 2 to the 23. Now, this basically means that any combination of chromosomes from one parent and then any combination of chromosomes from the other parent, 2 chromosomes paired up together, one from each parent, is how many different combinations there could be. Now, a large part of sexual reproduction is also random fertilization, which means that any one gamete from one parent can fertilize any one gamete from the other parent, leading to an extremely wide variety in which daughter cell is produced. So this is one of the many ways in which variation can occur within a species. Now, how does variation relate to adaptation? Well, an adaptation is a characteristic that an organism attains in response to their efforts to survive within a certain environment. The adaptation thus allows them to carry out necessary life and functions more easily. Adaptations that aid organisms are more likely to reappear within offspring as they are able to live longer and reproduce more easily, while adaptations that provide disadvantages to organisms make it more difficult to survive and more difficult to reproduce to pass the trait on to offspring. We're going to see this idea a lot within this topic, and it's really important to know that when an organism is being aided by their adaptation, they are going to be much more successful within their environment. When an organism is more successful, they will be able to live longer, reproduce more often, therefore leading to the trait's succession in the offspring, so the trait will be seen more. Conversely, the traits that are not aiding organisms, that are slowing them down, that are making them less able to survive within their environment, is going to help to reduce its frequency within the population, given that these organisms will not survive as long within the environment and maybe not have enough time to reproduce offspring with the same trait. So here in this picture, we have a lion, which I'm sure you have all seen before, and it kind of just notes some different characteristics of the lion, which may be adaptations to help it better survive within its environment. So for warmth, when it gets cold at night in Africa, circular eyes, whiskers for perspective, mouth for killing and roaring. Of course, a mouth lion will definitely need its mouth to help attack its prey and then chew it. A large male mane to denote to other females that it is a male. And then for paws, of course, to run, and a tail for balance, which is very important when they hunt. So a lion is obviously a very majestic creature with many different characteristics that have allowed it to become the king of the jungle. Now, populations and reproduction. The tendency of most species and populations is to reproduce more offspring than the environment can support. So a famous example, of course, the frog. I know we all saw the picture of the frog with its many, many, many eggs. The same could be said for a spider, which also lays many, many, many eggs. These organisms, unfortunately, are not all going to develop to become fully fledged adults. They many will die, many will be eaten by other organisms. So there's only a small fraction of these eggs that are laid that actually become full adults. And so that's how the environment offsets this tendency of populations to reproduce more than what the environment can handle. If every single one of those eggs developed into a frog, then there may be a shortage of flies, and given that all the frogs are eating flies, and things like that. So it's just another way in which the environment offsets this tendency, like I said. Now, individuals of a population that are better adapted to their environment will survive and produce more offspring than individuals that are less adapted. So, like I said, this is that same concept reappearing once again. Individuals that are better adapted live longer, reproduce more. The trait is seen more in the offspring, and of course, vice versa with those less desirable traits. There are also many factors that play into an organism's struggle to survive, so adaptations may contribute to all of these areas, or just one of them. Competition for food, predation, parasitism, disease, competition for mates, and competition for space. So maybe the large lion mane helped be an adaptation to competition for mates. Maybe female lions like male lions with bigger manes. We may not know that. Of course, going back to the lion example once again, the development of the large teeth within the mouth that can help it to cut into flesh. Obviously, a lion is a carnivore, and they need those sharp teeth and be able to help digest their prey. Here we have a perfect example of natural selection, which I'll get to in just a minute. And finally, a definition for natural selection. The process in which more fit organisms produce more offspring with desired traits, while less fit organisms struggle more to survive and cannot reproduce as much. This is that same concept again. I told you you would see it a lot. Individuals therefore pass on characteristics to their offspring, and the frequency of better adapted characteristics increases within a population, while the frequency of less adapted characteristics decreases. Now, let it be noted that certain characteristics, those that are not passed on, that are not genetic based, cannot be passed on to offspring. So someone who may have broken a specific finger, and I came up with this example myself because my dad used to play basketball, and he broke his pinky finger multiple times, and it is now kind of disfigured. It's not straight and aligned like the rest of his fingers are, because the pinky did not heal correctly after that repeated basketball injury. However, of course, even though he had that, ailment when I was born, I was not born with the same disfigured pinky because he was born with the normal pinky. But due to his actions and activity throughout his life, it led to the disfiguration of the pinky. But that change is not genetic based, so it was not passed on to me, and there is no risk in me passing that on to my offspring either. Here we can see another example of natural selection within giraffes. Obviously, you can see the giraffe on the farthest to the left has a much longer neck, and it is able to eat the food at the top, while the giraffes on the right have shorter necks and cannot exactly reach the food on the leaves and the branches. Now, we can imagine that food plays an important role in an organism's survival, and so these giraffes with the longer necks will be able to eat more, live longer, and reproduce giraffes that also have the long neck, while these shorter neck giraffes will start to die off because they can't get the necessary nutrients that they need to continue to survive and go on to reproduce. Now, our two applications. The first is antibiotic bacteria. An example of evolution within the species can be seen by antibiotic bacteria, in which bacteria resistant to antibiotics will survive and reproduce, while non-resistant strains of bacteria will be killed. This is very similar to the giraffe example. A bacteria that has the ability to fight off an antibiotic and to continue to go on and reproduce will then reproduce more bacteria with that same resistance to the antibiotics, while the non-resistant bacteria, of course, will be killed. So just like the giraffe example. Now, our last application, is adaptive radiation. So adaptive radiation is the divergence of organisms in the same species into two different species over many years as a result of different selection pressures, most likely due to differences within their environment. So in this example, Galapagos finches, one on the mainland and then one on the island, led to adaptive radiation, given that the ones on the island were forced to basically adapt to a new environment after many storms came and changed the size of the food in which they would eat. So Galapagos finches would feed off seeds, and after a series of storms came through called La Nina, the size of these seeds decreased. And obviously this big beak that you see here would not be able to eat those seeds as well as the smaller beak here. So slowly over time, the finches developed different sized beaks to help accommodate for the changes in their food source. I hope that this mini lesson was helpful, and yeah.